I heard every word you said about me. Clara Whitmore wasn't supposed to be standing outside that terrace door. She wasn't supposed to hear Duke Adrian Holloway describe her as quiet, obedient, and rich enough to save Holloway Manor. She wasn't supposed to learn that her entire future had been reduced to three cold calculations: her dowry, her womb, and her silence. But she did hear it. Every brutal, dismissive word. And in that moment, the agreeable girl they all expected, she died. What happens next will shake the foundations of English high society. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far Clara's story travels. The spring air tasted like champagne and lies. Clara had stepped onto the stone terrace of Ashford Hall to escape the suffocating ballroom, the endless parade of silk gowns, forced laughter, and conversations that circled like vultures around the same tired subjects: marriages, money, and who was sleeping with whom. At 22, she'd attended enough of these gatherings to know the script by heart. Smile. Nod. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never, ever have an opinion. She'd been good at it. Dangerously good. The cool evening breeze lifted the edges of her pale blue gown as she moved toward the balustrade, grateful for a moment alone. The fabric was expensive, imported French silk that her father had insisted upon, but it felt like a costume. Everything about her life felt like a costume lately. Below, the manicured gardens stretched into darkness, dotted with lanterns that swayed like fireflies. She closed her eyes and breathed, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest that had been growing for weeks, ever since the engagement had been announced. That's when she heard his voice. Honestly, Pemberton, it's a practical arrangement, nothing more. Adrian's voice carried through the partially open terrace door behind her, smooth and unbothered, with that aristocratic drawl that marked him as someone who'd never had to work for anything in his life. Clara froze, her hand still on the cold stone railing. Practical? Another man's voice, Lord Pemberton. She recognized it. He was one of Adrian's closest friends, a man with a cruel sense of humor and a habit of looking through women as if they were furniture. That's one way to describe marriage, I suppose. What else would you call it? Adrian laughed, and the sound made something twist in Clara's chest. It was the kind of laugh that came easy to men who'd never been denied anything. The Whitmore girl is perfect for what I need: quiet, well-bred, compliant. Her father's fortune will restore Holloway Manor, and she'll produce an heir without causing trouble. It's exactly what the estate needs. Clara's breath stopped. She should move, should walk away, should press her hands over her ears like a child hiding from thunder. She didn't. And what about what you need, Val? Pemberton asked, amusement thick in his tone. I need my ancestral home not to crumble into the ground, Adrian replied, ice clinking in what was probably his third brandy of the evening. I need the Holloway name to mean something again. My father let everything rot while he drank himself to death. And I'll be damned if I let 300 years of legacy disappear because of his incompetence. As for the rest, companionship, passion, all that romantic nonsense, I'll find it elsewhere. Discreetly, of course. Of course. Pemberton chuckled. Can't have the wife finding out. The wife won't care. The wife barely knows I exist beyond what her father's lawyers have told her. We've had perhaps 6 conversations, and she's contributed maybe 20 words total. Honestly, I'm not sure she's capable of stringing together a complete sentence on any topic more complex than the weather. They both laughed at that. Clara's hands had begun to shake. She pressed them flat against the stone, feeling the rough texture bite into her palms. Around her, the world had narrowed to a pinpoint. The distant music from the ballroom, the rustle of leaves, the pounding of her own heart that seemed loud enough to give her away. And the girl? Pemberton's voice took on a darker edge. Does she know she's signing up to be a broodmare with a title? The girl, Adrian said, and Clara could practically see him waving his hand dismissively. Doesn't know anything beyond needlepoint and piano. She barely speaks at gatherings. I don't think she's ever had an opinion in her life, controversial or otherwise. Which is ideal, really. The last thing I need is a wife with ideas. Or worse, the desire to share them. How refreshingly mercenary of you, Holloway. I prefer to think of it as practical. Love is for poets and fools. I'm neither. I need money. She has money. I have a title and an estate. She wants social position. We both get what we need, and no one has to pretend otherwise. except in public. Of course. In public, I'll play the devoted husband, escort her to the opera, dance with her at balls. Let society believe whatever pretty story they want. But in private, she'll have her wing of the manor, I'll have mine, and we'll meet for dinner when absolutely necessary and for conception when required. It's cleaner that way. No messy expectations. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart. That would be too romantic, too dramatic. This was different. This was the sound of every illusion she'd carefully constructed about her future splintering into pieces. She'd known the engagement was arranged. She'd known it was about money and position rather than affection. But she'd told herself, foolishly, naively, that perhaps there could be respect, partnership. Maybe not love, but at least mutual regard. She'd told herself that Adrian seemed kind enough, polite, that in their brief, chaperoned conversations he'd been courteous. What an idiot she'd been. 6 weeks until the wedding, Pemberton said. Think you can maintain the charade that long? I've maintained it this long, haven't I? Besides, the girl is so quiet I barely remember she's there most of the time. It's like being engaged to a particularly decorative piece of furniture. More laughter. Clara stepped back from the door, her movements mechanical. Her mind felt strange, disconnected from her body. She was floating somewhere above herself, watching this scene from a distance. Watching a young woman in an expensive dress learn that she was nothing more than a financial instrument, a womb with a dowry attached. Quiet, obedient, useful. That's all she was to him, all she'd ever been to anyone. Her father had raised her to be exactly this, agreeable, pleasant, decorative. After her mother died when Clara was 8, consumption, the doctors had said, though Clara suspected it was more complicated than that, he'd retreated into his ledgers and his factories, his endless pursuit of wealth. He'd left her care to a succession of governesses who'd trained her like one might train a show dog. Sit, stay, speak only when spoken to, never bite. And she'd learned so well that she'd almost forgotten there was anything else inside her. The first governess, Miss Hartley, had been the worst. Clara could still remember her voice, sharp as a ruler's edge. Young ladies do not have opinions, Clara. They have accomplishments. No one will marry you for your thoughts. When 7-year-old Clara had asked why, Miss Hartley had slapped her hand with that ruler and said, "Because thoughts make you difficult, and difficult girls end up alone." So Clara had learned to be easy, agreeable. She'd learned to nod and smile and keep every thought locked behind her teeth. She'd learned to be so quiet, so invisible, that people forgot she was in the room. It had kept her safe. It had kept her fed, clothed, educated in all the ways that mattered to society. It had also made her absolutely miserable, though she'd barely let herself acknowledge that until now. Standing there in the dark, eavesdropping on her own reduction to livestock, something shifted. Something that had been sleeping for years, maybe her entire life, cracked open like an egg. The polite, invisible girl they'd all created? She could feel her dying, and something else was taking her place. "When's the formal announcement in the Times?" Pemberton asked. "Already done. Ran this morning. The Duke of Holloway is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Clara Whitmore, daughter of Mr. Harold Whitmore of Whitmore Industries. Very proper, very boring, very her. And the wedding? 6 weeks. Her father's eager to seal the arrangement. Apparently she's been difficult to place. Too quiet, he said. Men find her dull. And you don't?" A pause. Clara held her breath. "I find her useful," Adrian said finally. "That's enough. More than enough, really. I don't need a wife who entertains me. I need one who won't embarrass me, won't spend beyond her allowance, and won't interfere with how I run the estate. The Whitmore girl fits every requirement. She's like a blank page. I can write whatever I need on her." The casual cruelty of it took Clara's breath away. She'd spent her entire life being that blank page, letting other people write on her, shape her, define her. Her father had written investment. Her governesses had written obedient. Society had written suitable. And now Adrian wanted to write useful. None of them had ever asked what she wanted to write. None of them had ever considered that she might have her own words. The fury that rose in her chest was so sudden and so complete that for a moment she couldn't breathe. It felt like standing too close to a fire, like her skin might crack from the heat of it. But beneath the fury was something else, something colder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous. Clarity. If she married Adrian Holloway as she was, quiet, obedient, useful, she would disappear completely. She would become a ghost in her own life, haunting the halls of Holloway Manor while he found his companionship in London, spending her father's money to restore his crumbling legacy. She would birth his children, host his dinners, wear his jewels, and die having never once been seen as a full human being. That future stretched before her like a prison sentence. She could refuse him, break the engagement, walk away. But that would destroy her reputation, make her unmarriageable, and likely earn her father's wrath. Women didn't simply walk away from dukes, no matter how cruel, not without consequences that followed them forever. She'd be labeled difficult, hysterical, ungrateful. Her father might cut her off entirely. Where would she go? What would she do? Women of her class had no skills beyond the ornamental, no way to earn a living. Refusing Adrian would be social suicide. Unless the idea formed slowly, like ice crystallizing on a window. Unless she made him walk away. If she became everything he didn't want, loud, opinionated, scandalous, difficult, he would have to break the engagement himself to protect his precious reputation, his family name, his pride. Men like Adrian didn't marry women who embarrassed them, and if he broke the engagement, she would be the victim, not the villain, pitied rather than scorned, free rather than trapped. It was risky. If she pushed too hard, she'd destroy herself along with the engagement. Society could be forgiving of a woman jilted by a duke, but not of a woman who seemed to court scandal deliberately. She'd have to be strategic, calculated. She'd have to make herself unsuitable while maintaining just enough plausible deniability that people would assume she was simply nervous or confused or experiencing some kind of breakdown brought on by wedding stress. Women were always allowed to be hysterical. It was one of the few freedoms they had. The terrace door opened fully, and Adrian Holloway stepped out, Pemberton behind him. Clara had exactly 3 seconds to compose her face before they noticed her. She turned, letting surprise flicker across her features. Miss Whitmore. Adrian's own surprise was genuine, but he covered it quickly with a practiced smile. He was handsome in the way that dukes usually were, tall, well-dressed, with dark hair that fell just so across his forehead and sharp features that looked good in portraits. His eyes were gray, cold as morning frost. At 28, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. I didn't realize you were out here. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since their engagement had been arranged 3 weeks ago. Saw the entitled tilt of his chin, the casual cruelty in his smile, the absolute certainty that the world existed to serve his needs. Something in her chest turned to steel. Your Grace. She curtsied, the movement perfect, practiced. Years of training made it automatic. Lord Pemberton. Pemberton gave her a cursory nod, his eyes already glazing over with disinterest. To him, she was exactly what Adrian had described, furniture, decorative and silent. Escaping the heat? Adrian asked, stepping closer. He moved like a man who owned space, never questioning his right to occupy it. It is rather stifling inside. Yes. Clara kept her voice soft, docile. Not yet. Not here. I needed air. Quite understandable. These gatherings can be overwhelming. He said it like he was talking to a child who'd gotten lost at a fair. Shall I escort you back? He offered his arm, playing the gentleman. Clara stared at it for a moment, this arm that belonged to a man who saw her as livestock, and something inside her screamed. But she took it, her fingers light on his sleeve. How kind. As they walked back toward the ballroom, Adrian made pleasant, meaningless small talk. The weather had been fine. The music was quite good. Lady Ashford had outdone herself with the flowers. Claire responded with the expected murmurs of agreement, but inside, she was counting. 6 weeks until the wedding. 6 weeks to become someone he couldn't possibly marry. 6 weeks to burn down every expectation they'd ever had of her. They re-entered the ballroom, and the wall of heat and noise hit her like a physical thing. The orchestra was playing something sweeping and romantic. Couples spun across the floor in practiced formations, their movements synchronized by years of dancing lessons and social training. Society in motion, everyone playing their part. "Would you dance, Miss Whitmore?" Adrian asked. It wasn't really a question. It was an obligation, a performance they were both expected to execute. "Of course, Your Grace." He led her onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with the kind of impersonal touch one might use to move furniture. They began to move, falling into the rhythm of the waltz. Clara had been taught to dance by the same governesses who'd taught her to be quiet. Dancing was safe. Dancing had rules. As long as you followed the steps, you couldn't go wrong. "You're very quiet tonight," Adrian observed after they'd completed one rotation. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes scanned the room, cataloging the important people, calculating his next conversation. Clara looked up at him, studying the sharp line of his jaw, the way his cravat was tied with perfect precision. Everything about him was controlled, calculated, designed for maximum impact. "Am I?" she asked. "You're always quiet." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, delivered with the same tone one might use to note that the wallpaper was blue. "I don't think I've ever heard you voice an opinion on anything." Something hot flared in Clara's chest, but she kept her face smooth. "Perhaps I'm simply a good listener, Your Grace." "Perhaps." He seemed satisfied with that answer, his attention already drifting to Lord Ashford, who was watching them from across the room. They danced in silence for another minute. Clara used the time to study him more carefully, to memorize the details of the man who'd reduced her to a transaction. The way he held himself, like the world was a stage built specifically for his performance. The way his eyes never quite focused on her, even when they were dancing. The way he touched her like she was already his possession, something owned rather than offered. When the music ended, Adrian bowed, perfectly correct, and Clara curtsied. Then he excused himself to speak with Lord Ashford about something terribly important, leaving her standing alone at the edge of the dance floor. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding, her mind racing. He doesn't even see me. The thought should have hurt, should have made her sad. Instead, it made her angry. She turned and walked toward the refreshment table, accepting a glass of champagne from a servant. The bubbles fizzed against her tongue, sharp and bright. Around her, society swirled in its endless dance of power and performance. Women in jewels and silk, men in perfectly tailored coats, everyone playing their role. And Clara, standing in the middle of it all, feeling like she was seeing it clearly for the first time. "Clara!" Lady Margaret Ashford appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. Margaret was her age, with blonde curls and a tendency toward breathless enthusiasm about everything. They weren't exactly friends. Clara didn't really have friends, but they'd known each other since childhood. "I saw you dancing with the Duke. You must be thrilled about the engagement." "Thrilled?" Clara echoed, the word tasting like ash. 6 weeks! Margaret squeezed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You must be counting the days. He's so handsome, so powerful, and Holloway Manor. I've heard it's magnificent. All those gardens and the portrait gallery, and I've heard it's falling apart." The words came out before Clara could stop them. Margaret blinked, her smile faltering. "What?" Clara should take it back, should laugh it off, should say something about wedding nerves making her silly. Instead, she said, "The East Wing is apparently uninhabitable, water damage from a leaking roof that hasn't been repaired in years, and the tenant farms are operating at a loss. The whole estate is hemorrhaging money." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How do you know that?" "I read." Clara shrugged, taking another sip of champagne. The alcohol was making her bold, or maybe it was just the fury still burning in her chest. "My father's man of business did research before agreeing to the match. The Holloway estate is in terrible shape financially. That's why the Duke needs my dowry so desperately." "Hmm?" This was true. Clara had found the report in her father's study 2 weeks ago, filed away in a leather portfolio. She'd read it by candlelight while the household slept, learning exactly how desperate Adrian's situation was. The debts, the mortgages, the crumbling infrastructure, the failed investments his father had made before drinking himself into an early grave. Her father was essentially buying her a duke, and the Duke was selling himself to save his legacy. At the time, the information had made her sad. Now, it felt like ammunition. But Margaret lowered her voice, scandalized, glancing around to see if anyone had overheard. You shouldn't know about such things. It's not proper for ladies to concern themselves with financial matters. Isn't it? Clara tilted her head, examining Margaret like she was a puzzle with missing pieces. I'm about to pour my entire fortune into that estate. My father's money, well, my money technically, since it will become my dowry, will be used to repair those roofs and pay off those debts. Shouldn't I know what I'm buying? Buying? Margaret looked genuinely shocked now, her blue eyes wide. Clara, you make it sound like a business arrangement. That's exactly what it is. But Clara didn't say that. She'd already said too much. She could see the wheels turning in Margaret's head, could practically watch the gossip forming like a pearl around a grain of sand. I suppose I'm just nervous, Clara said, softening her tone, playing the part Margaret expected. You know how it is before a wedding. Everything feels so transactional. Oh, Clara. Margaret's face melted into sympathy. That's just cold feet. Every bride feels that way. But once you're married, once you see how wonderful it is to be a duchess, you'll forget all these silly worries. Clara smiled and let Margaret believe it. Let her think this was just wedding jitters, just a nervous bride saying things she didn't mean. But as Margaret excused herself, no doubt to immediately find her closest friends and share this delicious tidbit, Clara felt a small thrill of satisfaction. The first stone had been thrown. She moved through the ballroom, champagne in hand, listening to conversations swirl around her. The usual topics: who was courting whom, which families were facing financial trouble, the latest scandal involving Lord Someone or other and his mistress. Clara had attended hundreds of these gatherings. She knew the script by heart. Women clustered in their little groups, gossiping and judging. Men gathered by the card tables and the brandy, discussing politics and business and things they believed women couldn't understand. It was all so predictable, so rigidly controlled, and Clara was about to shatter it. She found Lord Edmund Cartwright by the terrace doors, holding court with a small group of older men. Cartwright was perhaps 40, with thinning hair and a belly that strained against his waistcoat. He owned several factories in the north and had a reputation for being cheap with his workers and generous with his opinions. The old Clara would have avoided him, would have found someone safer to talk to, someone who wouldn't notice or care about her presence. The new Clara walked straight toward him. Lord Cartwright, she said, interrupting his monologue about something, I couldn't help but overhear you discussing the new factory regulations. He turned, surprised to be addressed by a woman, and his face rearranged itself into something approximating politeness. Miss Whitmore, yes, we were just discussing Parliament's latest interference in private enterprise. You mean the restrictions on working hours for children? The other men shifted uncomfortably. Women didn't insert themselves into political discussions. It simply wasn't done. Cartwright's smile became condescending. Yes, well, these regulations sound noble on paper, but they fail to account for economic reality. How is a man supposed to turn a profit when the government insists on coddling workers? The old Clara would have nodded, would have murmured something agreeable and drifted away. The new Clara said, You don't think children should be limited to 12-hour workdays? The air around them seemed to freeze. Cartwright blinked, thrown off balance. Well, that is, the economy requires a certain amount of flexibility. The economy would be stronger if workers weren't dying of exhaustion, Clara interrupted, her voice still pleasant, but her words precise as scalpels. Or losing limbs in machinery because they're too tired to focus. Healthy workers are productive workers, Lord Cartwright. It's simple mathematics. If you work a child 16 hours a day, they'll be dead or disabled within a few years. Then you have to train someone new. Whereas if you work them reasonable hours, they'll be productive for decades. The long-term profit is obvious. Cartwright's face had gone red, the color creeping up from his collar. Miss Whitmore, I hardly think a young lady should concern herself with human lives or with economics. Clara tilted her head, her expression innocent. Because I'm discussing both. Are you saying women aren't capable of understanding either topic? One of the other men coughed. Another stared at her like she'd sprouted horns. "That's not what I—" Cartwright sputtered. "This is most inappropriate. Is it inappropriate to care about children being maimed in factories? Or is it just inappropriate for me to say so out loud?" Clara took a sip of her champagne, maintaining perfect composure even though her heart was racing. "I'm curious about the distinction." Cartwright drew himself up, offended dignity radiating from every pore. He was a man unused to being challenged, especially not by women, especially not in public. "Your father will hear about this, Miss Whitmore. This is absolutely unacceptable behavior." "I hope he does hear about it," Clara said sweetly. "I'd love to discuss factory regulations with him. He owns several factories himself, as you know. Perhaps he'd be interested in the data showing that better working conditions actually increase productivity and reduce costs over time. There's a fascinating study from the Manchester Mills that—" But Cartwright had already turned and stalked away, his face purple, his dignity in tatters. The other men followed him, leaving Clara alone with her champagne and the growing weight of stares from around the room. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. But she wasn't scared. She was exhilarated. She'd just committed social suicide, and it felt like flying. The whispers started immediately. She could see it happening, watch it spread like ripples in a pond. Women leaning toward each other, hands over mouths. Men glancing in her direction, eyebrows raised. The news traveling from group to group with the efficiency of a telegraph system. Lady Clara Whitmore just argued politics with Lord Cartwright. Lady Clara Whitmore spoke about factory conditions. Lady Clara Whitmore used the word mathematics in mixed company. Lady Clara Whitmore has opinions. Clara moved to the edge of the room, positioning herself near a potted palm where she could observe without being immediately visible. She watched the gossip spread, watched the shocked faces, the scandalized whispers. Across the ballroom, she caught sight of Adrian. He was still deep in conversation with Lord Ashford, completely oblivious to what had just happened. But the women around him were whispering, glancing between him and Clara with barely concealed excitement. Someone would tell him soon, probably within minutes. Good. Let him hear what his quiet, useful bride had done. Clara finished her champagne and accepted another glass from a passing servant. The alcohol was making everything feel slightly unreal, slightly distant. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline. "Miss Whitmore." She turned to find Lady Pemberton approaching, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lady Pemberton was in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and a reputation for being the ultimate arbiter of social propriety. "Lady Pemberton," Clara curtsied. "My dear girl." Lady Pemberton's voice was syrupy with false kindness. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed rather agitated just now. Are you feeling quite well?" "Perfectly well, thank you. It's just that arguing with Lord Cartwright about factory regulations, well, it's rather unusual behavior for a young lady, especially one about to be married. Some might worry you're experiencing wedding nerves." There it was, the socially acceptable excuse, the out she was being offered, wedding nerves. A temporary madness that would pass once she was safely married and controlled. Clara could take it, could apologize, claim confusion, let Lady Pemberton pat her hand and explain it all away. Instead, she said, "I wasn't arguing, I was discussing. There's a difference." Lady Pemberton's smile tightened. "Discussing politics is not appropriate for whom? For women? Why not?" Clara kept her voice level, curious rather than confrontational. "We're affected by political decisions just as much as men. More so, in many cases, since we have fewer legal protections. Shouldn't we be allowed to discuss the laws that govern our lives?" "You're being deliberately difficult. I'm asking a genuine question." Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. She was reevaluating. Clara could see it happening, trying to determine if this was hysteria or something more calculated. "The Duke of Holloway is a very influential man, Miss Whitmore. His wife will need to be above reproach. This kind of behavior." "What kind of behavior?" "Having thoughts, expressing them, could reflect very poorly on him." "Then perhaps he should reconsider the engagement." The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and deliberate. Lady Pemberton's face went cold. "I see. Well, I'm sure this conversation will be reported to all the relevant parties. Good evening, Miss Whitmore." She swept away, her spine rigid with disapproval. Clara watched her go, feeling something settle in her chest. A decision made, a line crossed. There would be no going back now. The rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. Clara didn't retreat, didn't hide, didn't apologize. When people approached her with concern, she smiled and changed the subject. When they asked if she was feeling well, she assured them she'd never felt better. She could see her father across the room, his face growing progressively darker as various people spoke to him, no doubt reporting her behavior, expressing concern, warning him that his daughter was making a spectacle of herself. Around 11 o'clock, he finally caught her eye and jerked his head toward a quieter corner. Clara took her time walking over, finishing her champagne on the way. "Clara." His voice was low and tight with fury. "A word, now." She followed him to an alcove partially hidden by a Chinese screen, her chin up, her spine straight. "What?" he hissed, keeping his voice down but letting the rage show in his eyes. "Do you think you're doing?" "Having conversations, father." "You embarrassed Lord Cartwright. You argued about politics, about factory conditions." His hand twitched at his side like he wanted to strike her, but remembered they were in public. "Do you have any idea how that looks? What people are saying? That I have a functioning mind?" His face went purple. "Don't be clever with me, girl. You will apologize to Lord Cartwright immediately, and to Lady Pemberton, and to anyone else you've offended with this ridiculous display. No." The word came out calm and clear. Her father stared at her like she'd started speaking Chinese. "What did you say?" "I said no, father. I won't apologize for speaking the truth. If Lord Cartwright is offended by basic economic facts, that's his problem, not mine. You will do as I say, or what?" Clara met his eyes directly, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look away first. "You'll break my engagement to the Duke? Send me away?" "Please do. I'd rather be disowned than married to a man who sees me as livestock." The fury in her father's eyes turned to something else. Confusion. Suspicion. "What are you talking about?" She'd said too much, revealed her hand too early, but she was past the point of careful calculation. "I heard him, father, tonight, on the terrace. I heard Duke Holloway tell Lord Pemberton exactly what he thinks of me, that I'm quiet and boring and useful, that he'll take my money and give me a title, and that's all I'm worth to him, that he'll find his companionship elsewhere while I sit in my wing of the manor and produce heirs like a good little broodmare." Her father's face had gone from purple to pale. You were eavesdropping?" "I was standing on a terrace. He was the one speaking loud enough to be overheard." "What exactly did he say? Does it matter?" "You already know it's true. This whole arrangement is about money, my money. Buying a title, buying social position, buying a womb to continue the Holloway line. Love, respect, partnership, those were never part of the contract, were they?" Her father's jaw clenched. "You're being hysterical." "I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm being completely honest. And you hate it because it's inconvenient. This engagement represents everything I've worked for, everything I've built. The Whitmore name will be connected to one of the oldest families in England. Our grandchildren will be your grandchildren," Clara interrupted. "Not mine. Not really. They'll belong to the Holloway family. I'll just be the vessel that produced them. Another piece of property transferred from one man to another." Her father's hand shot out and gripped her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You will stop this nonsense immediately. You're overwrought, wedding nerves. We'll blame it on that. You'll apologize, behave yourself, and in 6 weeks you'll marry the Duke as planned." Clara looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me." "Not until you—" "Let go." Something in her voice made him release her. They stared at each other. This man who'd raised her to be silent and obedient, and this woman who'd finally decided to speak. "I won't marry him," Clara said quietly. "You don't have a choice. Then he'll have to break the engagement himself, because I will make it impossible for him to go through with it." Understanding dawned in her father's eyes, and with it, a cold calculation that Clara recognized from his business dealings. He was already strategizing, already planning how to contain this. "You foolish girl," he said softly. "You'll destroy yourself. Maybe, but at least I'll do it on my own terms." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the alcove. Her legs felt weak, shaky. The champagne and adrenaline were wearing off, leaving her feeling hollowed out and slightly sick. But she'd done it. She'd declared war on her own life, on every expectation, on the future that had been planned for her without her consent. And there was no going back now. Clara found her cloak, collected it from the servant, and wrapped it around herself. She needed air, needed space, needed to be anywhere but in this ballroom full of people who were probably discussing her like she was a piece of broken china. She slipped out a side door and into the gardens. The night was cool and quiet. The sounds of the party faded behind her as she walked deeper into the landscaped grounds. Above, the stars were sharp and bright, indifferent to human drama. Clara found a bench beneath a willow tree and sat, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing. What had she done? She'd destroyed her reputation in a single evening. By tomorrow, all of London would know that quiet, agreeable Clara Whitmore had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Adrian would hear about it. He would be furious. And then what? If her plan worked, he would break the engagement to save his own reputation. She would be free, if damaged. If it didn't work, she didn't want to think about that. She sat there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees, trying to steady her breathing. Eventually, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. Miss Whitmore. She looked up to find Adrian standing there, his face unreadable in the shadows. Her heart stopped. Your Grace? She started to stand, but he gestured for her to remain seated. I've been hearing interesting things about you this evening, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Have you? Apparently, my quiet, agreeable fiancé has been causing quite a stir, arguing politics with Lord Cartwright, discussing factory regulations, using words like economics and mathematics. He took a step closer. Care to explain? Clara looked up at him, this man who'd reduced her to a transaction, and felt that steel in her chest solidify into something unbreakable. No, she said simply. His eyebrows rose. No? I don't owe you an explanation, Your Grace. We're engaged, not yet married. My thoughts and words are still my own. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or annoyance. Your behavior reflects on me, he said coldly, and on the Holloway name. Whatever game you're playing, game. Clara stood now facing him. You think this is a game? What else would it be? You've been perfectly docile for weeks, and suddenly tonight you're arguing politics and offending half of society. It's clearly calculated to achieve something. He was smarter than she'd given him credit for. Maybe I just decided to have opinions, Clara said. Is that so shocking? From you, yes. He studied her face, trying to read her. What changed? I heard you describe me as livestock, but she didn't say that. Not yet. That card was to be played later, when the time was right. Perhaps I simply woke up, she said instead. They stood there in the garden, the party continuing behind them, two people who were supposed to marry in 6 weeks staring at each other like strangers. Because that's what they were. Strangers forced into an arrangement neither of them truly wanted, for reasons that had nothing to do with each other and everything to do with money and power and social position. This engagement is important, Adrian said finally, to both our families. Whatever personal feelings you're experiencing, you need to control them. Control them, Clara repeated. Like you control your estate, your servants, your life? Yes. The single word was like a slap. Clara felt something in her harden even further. What if I don't want to be controlled, Your Grace? Then you're going to find married life very difficult. Or perhaps you will. His eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? It's a promise. They stared at each other, and Clara saw the moment his patience ran out. Get yourself under control, Miss Whitmore, he said coldly, or I'll do it for you. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the garden. Clara stood there, watching him disappear into the darkness, and smiled. Perfect. She'd rattled him, made him show his hand, made him reveal exactly who he was, a man who expected obedience and would resort to threats when he didn't get it. The war had officially begun, and Clara Whitmore, the quiet girl everyone had overlooked, was no longer fighting to survive. She was fighting to win. The gossip reached every corner of London by breakfast. Clara woke to find 3 letters slipped under her bedroom door. The first was from Margaret Ashford, written in breathless, looping script. "Clara, what happened last night? Everyone is talking about you. Mother says you're having a nervous collapse. Are you quite all right?" The second was from a distant cousin she barely knew, offering prayers for her swift recovery from whatever madness had possessed her. The third was from Adrian's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Holloway. It was brief and cold. "We must speak. Today. 3 o'clock. Do not be late." Clara sat on the edge of her bed, still in her nightgown, and laughed. The sound came out sharp and slightly unhinged, but she didn't care. They thought she was crazy. Perfect. Crazy women were unpredictable, dangerous, unmarriageable, exactly what she needed to be. A knock at her door made her look up. "Miss Clara?" It was Mary, her lady's maid, her voice hesitant. "Your father requests your presence in his study. Immediately." Of course he did. Clara dressed slowly, deliberately. She chose a morning dress in pale green, pretty, proper, completely appropriate. If she was going to burn down society's expectations, she'd do it while looking impeccable. No one could accuse her of slovenliness or hysteria if her hair was perfectly arranged and her gloves spotless. When she descended to her father's study, she found him behind his massive mahogany desk, his face the color of old brick. Lord Cartwright sat in one of the leather chairs looking smug, and standing by the window, arms crossed, was Adrian. Clara's steps didn't falter. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and waited. "Sit down," her father said. "I'd rather stand." His jaw clenched. "Clara." "Miss Whitmore," Adrian interrupted, his voice dangerously soft, "has apparently decided that cooperation is beneath her." She turned to face him fully. In the morning light, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his mouth. He was angry, good. "Lord Cartwright has graciously agreed to accept an apology for your behavior last night," her father said, each word forced through gritted teeth. "You will apologize. Now." Clara looked at Cartwright, at his self-satisfied expression, at the way he sat there expecting her compliance. "No," she said. Cartwright's face went red. "Young lady." "I'm not sorry," Clara continued, her voice calm. "Everything I said last night was factually accurate. If you're offended by facts, Lord Cartwright, perhaps you should examine why the truth bothers you so much." "How dare you!" Cartwright surged to his feet. "Your father assured me—" "My father doesn't control what I say." Clara turned to her father. "Neither do you. Not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian moved away from the window, his eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that should have frightened her. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" "I'm not trying to accomplish anything. I'm simply existing as myself instead of as the person everyone else wants me to be." "That's a lie." Adrian stepped closer. "This is calculated. You were perfectly docile until yesterday. Now suddenly you're a revolutionary? I don't believe in sudden transformations." He was too perceptive. Clara felt a flicker of unease but pushed it down. "Believe what you want, Your Grace." "I want," he said coldly, "an explanation and an apology. To Lord Cartwright, to Lady Pemberton, to everyone you offended. No." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "You're my fiancée. Your behavior reflects on me. Then break the engagement." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Her father made a strangled sound. Cartwright's mouth fell open, and Adrian went very, very still. "What did you say?" His voice was soft, deadly. Clara's heart was hammering, but she kept her face calm. "I said break the engagement. If my behavior is so unacceptable, if I'm such an embarrassment, then end it. Free yourself from the burden of a wife with opinions." "You want me to break the engagement?" Adrian said it slowly, like he was working through a puzzle. "You want to be released from our arrangement." "I want to stop pretending," Clara said, "about any of it." "Clara!" Her father slammed his hand on the desk. "That's enough. You will apologize, you will behave yourself, and you will marry the Duke in 6 weeks as planned. No, you don't have a choice. Then force me." Clara turned to face him fully. "Drag me to the altar. Hold me down while I sign the papers. But you can't make me cooperate. You can't make me smile and nod and play the grateful bride. Those days are over. Her father stood, his chair scraping back. You ungrateful. Ungrateful for what? For being sold like livestock? For being reduced to my dowry and my womb? For being told my whole life that my thoughts don't matter, my feelings don't matter, that I exist only to serve men? Clara's voice rose despite herself. What exactly should I be grateful for, Father? For everything I've given you, the clothes, the education, the opportunities. You gave me a cage. The words came out raw. A beautiful, expensive cage, but it's still a cage. Adrian had been watching this exchange with cold calculation. Now he spoke. Mr. Whitmore, Lord Cartwright, would you give us a moment? I'd like to speak with my fiancée, alone. Cartwright looked like he wanted to protest, but Adrian's tone left no room for argument. Her father hesitated, then nodded curtly and left, pulling a sputtering Cartwright with him. The door closed. Claire and Adrian stood facing each other across the study, the morning sun slanting through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing between them. All right, Adrian said quietly. No audience now. Tell me the truth. What is this really about? Clara could tell him, could throw his words from the terrace in his face, watch him squirm with the knowledge that she'd heard everything. But that felt too simple, too easy. This is about me deciding I matter, she said instead. That my life matters. My thoughts. My future. All of it. And marrying me prevents that? Marrying you erases me completely. Something flickered in his expression. Not guilt. Men like Adrian didn't do guilt. But something. You don't know that. Don't I? Clara moved to her father's desk, picked up a letter opener, turned it over in her hands. Tell me, Your Grace, what do you know about me? My actual self, not the resume my father provided. What do I care about? What makes me angry? What do I dream about when I'm alone? He was quiet for a long moment. You play piano. Because I was forced to learn. I hate it. The repetition makes me want to scream. You enjoy needlepoint. I've never touched a needle in my life if I could avoid it. That's what governesses tell fathers when they want to seem like they're earning their wages. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then what do you actually enjoy? Reading, economics, political theory. I've read Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Mary Wollstonecraft. I have opinions about tariff reform and labor laws and women's property rights. I think the current system is designed to keep half the population powerless, and I think men benefit from that powerlessness so much that they can't even see it anymore. She watched his face as she spoke, watched the surprise, the discomfort, the growing realization that he'd never actually looked at her before. You never said any of this, he said finally. You never asked. No one asks. They just assume quiet means empty. Clara set down the letter opener. But I'm not empty. I never was. I was just hiding. And now you've decided to stop hiding. Yes. Why now? Why so suddenly? She could tell him, should tell him, but the truth was a weapon, and she wasn't ready to use it yet. Does it matter? She asked instead. It matters if you're trying to manipulate me into ending this engagement. There it was, the accusation she'd been waiting for. Would that work? Claire asked. If I became scandalous enough, embarrassing enough, would you actually break it off? Or would you just find new ways to control me? Adrian's expression hardened. I don't need to control you. I need you to fulfill your obligations. Obligations. The word tasted bitter. Is that what marriage is to you? An obligation? It's a partnership, a business arrangement. We both gain something. What do I gain? A title, position, security. And what do you gain? He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. My father's debts will be paid, Clara said softly. The estate will be restored. The Holloway name will survive another generation, all because of my money. That's what you gain. Me, the actual person, I'm just the inconvenient package the money comes in. That's not... It's exactly that. Clara moved toward the door, then paused. I'll make you a deal, Your Grace. I'll attend the meeting with your mother this afternoon. I'll be perfectly civil, but I won't apologize for having thoughts, and I won't promise to stop speaking them. If that's unacceptable to you, then end this. We both know you need my money more than I need your title. She left before he could respond, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. That had been reckless. Dangerous. She'd shown too much of her hand, revealed too much of the game. But it felt good. It felt right. She spent the rest of the morning in her room, ignoring the increasingly frantic letters that arrived. From Margaret, from other acquaintances, from distant relatives who'd heard the gossip and wanted to offer advice or condemnation. Clara burned them all in her fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken, feeling something in her chest grow lighter with each flame. At 2:30, she dressed for her meeting with the Dowager Duchess. She chose a dress in deep burgundy, elegant and severe. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She looked composed, controlled, perfect. The mask she'd worn her whole life, but this time she was wearing it deliberately, choosing it. That made all the difference. The Holloway townhouse was in Mayfair, all white columns and pristine windows. A butler answered the door, his face carefully neutral, and led Clara to a drawing room done in cream and gold. The Dowager Duchess sat in a high-backed chair like a queen on a throne. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair and Adrian's same gray eyes, sharp and assessing. She didn't stand when Clara entered. "Miss Whitmore, sit." Clara sat, folding her hands in her lap. The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "I'm told you've been causing trouble. I've been speaking my mind. Those are the same thing for women of our station." The Dowager's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "What are you playing at, girl?" "I'm not playing at anything. Liar." The word was said almost fondly. "Everything is a game in our world. The question is what you're trying to win." Clara met those sharp eyes and made a decision. "Freedom." "Ah." The Dowager nodded slowly. "You want out of the engagement." "Yes." "Why not simply refuse, break it yourself? Because then I'm the villain, the ungrateful girl who threw away a duke. My reputation would be destroyed. No one else would want me. I'd likely be cut off by my father." Clara paused. "But if your son breaks it off, if he decides I'm unsuitable, then I'm the victim." Pitied instead of scorned. The Dowager laughed, the sound sharp and unexpected. "Well, at least you're honest about your scheming. That's refreshing." "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm furious, but I'm also impressed." The Dowager stood, moved to the window. "Do you know what Adrian told me about you? That you were quiet, biddable, perfect Duchess material." "I'm none of those things." "Clearly." The Dowager turned back. "The question is whether you're brave enough to maintain this rebellion. It's one thing to cause a scandal at a party. It's another to sustain it for weeks while all of society turns against you. Can you handle being called hysterical, mad? Can you handle the whispers, the cut invitations, the former friends who'll cross the street to avoid you?" Clara thought about the years of silence, the swallowed words, the buried fury. "Yes," she said, "I can handle all of it. Even if it means destroying yourself in the process? I'm already destroyed. I've been destroyed since I was 8 years old and learned that being quiet was the only way to survive. This?" Clara gestured to herself. "This is me trying to come back to life." The Dowager studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which." "Can't I be both?" "Most revolutionaries are." The Dowager returned to her chair. "Here's what I'll tell you, girl. My son is arrogant, entitled. He thinks the world exists to serve the Holloway legacy. His father was worse, drunk and cruel and utterly useless. Adrian at least has some sense of responsibility, but he's never been challenged. Not really. Everyone bows and scrapes because he's a duke." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm bored." The Dowager shrugged. "And because I'd like to see what happens when someone actually stands up to him. It might be good for him, or it might destroy you both." She paused. "Either way, it will be entertaining." Clara didn't know whether to be grateful or horrified. "I won't help you," the Dowager continued. "I won't actively work against you either. But understand this. If you humiliate my son publicly, if you damage the Holloway name beyond repair, I will destroy you. Family comes first. Always." "Understood." "Good." The Dowager rang a small bell and the butler appeared. "Miss Whitmore is leaving. Show her out." As Clara stood, the Dowager added, "One more thing. Adrian is meeting with your father tomorrow to discuss moving up the wedding date. They think a quick marriage will prevent further scandal. Clara's blood ran cold. How soon? 2 weeks instead of 6. 2 weeks. She'd have 2 weeks instead of 6 to make herself so unsuitable that Adrian had no choice but to end things. The timeline had just collapsed. Thank you for telling me, Clara said quietly. Don't thank me. I just want to see what you'll do about it. Clara left the townhouse feeling like she'd been thrown into a fight with new rules and a ticking clock. 2 weeks. She needed to escalate, needed to do something so shocking, so completely beyond the pale, that Adrian would have to walk away. But what? The answer came to her 3 days later at Lady Pemberton's garden party. Clara attended despite knowing she'd be the center of whispered gossip. She wore white, virginal, innocent, and smiled pleasantly at everyone who stared. Let them whisper, let them wonder. She was standing near the refreshment table when she overheard two men discussing the upcoming vote in Parliament about women's property rights. Absolute nonsense, one said. Give women control of their own money and you'll have chaos. Women don't understand finance, the other agreed. It's not their fault. They're simply not built for it. Clara turned to them, her smile bright and deadly. Gentlemen, I couldn't help overhearing you're discussing the Married Women's Property Act? They looked startled to be addressed, but recovered quickly. Yes, miss. Whitmore. Clara Whitmore, the Duke of Holloway's fiancée. Recognition and wariness crossed their faces. I have a question, Clara continued. If women aren't capable of understanding finance, how do you explain the fact that my father's business relies heavily on my mother's initial investment? She negotiated the terms herself. The profits from her portion fund half of Whitmore Industries. This was true. Clara had found the documents years ago, hidden in her father's papers. Her mother had been sharp, clever, good with numbers. She died before she could teach Clara the same skills, but she'd left proof that women could be just as capable as men. The men sputtered. Well, there are always exceptions. Or perhaps the rule is wrong. Clara smiled. Perhaps women seem incapable because they're deliberately denied education and opportunity. Starve someone and then mock them for being weak. It's a neat trick. A small crowd was gathering now. Clara could feel the attention, the shock. Miss Whitmore, one of the men said stiffly, this is hardly appropriate conversation. Why? Because I'm a woman discussing women's rights? Isn't that exactly the appropriate conversation for me to have? You're being hysterical. I'm being logical. If that seems hysterical to you, perhaps you should examine your own assumptions. Clara turned to the gathered crowd. I think women should have the right to own property, to control their own money, to make their own decisions. If that makes me unsuitable for polite society, then polite society is the problem, not me. The silence was absolute. Then, from the back of the crowd, a woman's voice. I agree with her. Clara turned to see an older woman, perhaps 40, dressed in practical gray. She didn't recognize her. So do I, another woman said, younger, with red hair and a defiant expression. And I, came a third voice. The men looked horrified, but the women were watching Clara with something that looked like hunger, like she'd said something they'd all been thinking but never dared speak aloud. This is outrageous, one of the men blustered. Lord Pemberton will hear about this. The Duke of Holloway will— The Duke of Holloway, came Adrian's cold voice from behind Clara, is standing right here. The crowd parted. Adrian moved through them like a knife through silk, his face perfectly composed but his eyes blazing with fury. He stopped directly in front of Clara. A word, he said quietly. Now. Clara held his gaze. Of course, Your Grace. He took her arm, not gently, and steered her away from the crowd, toward a more secluded part of the garden. When they were out of earshot, he released her like she'd burned him. What the hell are you doing? Expressing an opinion. You're destroying yourself. Do you understand that? Every word out of your mouth is another nail in your social coffin. Good. Good. Adrian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to be ruined? I want to be free. If ruin is the price, I'll pay it. This isn't just about you. This reflects on me, on my family. Then end it. Clara stepped closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Break the engagement. Tell society I'm mad. Tell them I'm unsuitable. Tell them whatever you want. But let me go. I can't. The words came out strangled. The contracts are signed. The money is already being transferred. Breaking it now would be complicated. Complicated or expensive? His jaw clenched. Both. So you'd rather marry a woman who humiliates you publicly than deal with the financial complications of ending it. I'd rather you stopped this insanity and fulfilled your obligations. My obligations? Clara laughed, the sound sharp. You want me to be quiet and grateful while you spend my money and take my body and give nothing back but contempt. Those are my obligations. That's not... Adrian stopped, running a hand through his hair. That's not how I see it. Then how do you see it? Explain it to me. Make me understand why I should chain myself to a man who sees me as a transaction. It's not a chain, it's a partnership. Partnership implies equality. We both know this marriage would be anything but equal. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less angry, almost confused. What do you want from me, Clara? It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it startled them both. I want you to see me, she said quietly. Actually see me. Not the quiet girl your mother approved of. Not the dowry walking around in a dress. Me. The person with thoughts and feelings and dreams that have nothing to do with being your duchess. I'm trying to see you, but you keep changing. Every time I think I understand, you become someone different. I'm not changing. I'm just finally showing you who I always was. They stood there in the garden, close enough to touch, the party continuing without them. Clara could hear distant laughter, the clink of glasses. Normal society functioning while she and Adrian tore their arrangement apart. I heard you, she said suddenly, on the terrace, at the Ashford ball. I heard everything you said to Lord Pemberton. Adrian went very still. What? I heard you describe me as quiet and boring and useful. I heard you talk about finding companionship elsewhere. I heard you reduce me to my dowry and my ability to produce heirs. Clara's voice didn't shake. So don't ask me to trust you. Don't ask me to believe this is a partnership. I know exactly what it is. The color had drained from Adrian's face. Clara, I know what you think of me, and I'm showing you that you're wrong. I'm not quiet, I'm not boring, and I will never ever be useful to someone who doesn't see me as human. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there among the roses. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. She made it to the garden gate before her composure cracked, before the shaking started, before she had to lean against the stone wall and breathe through the adrenaline crash. She'd done it. She'd told him the truth, shown her hand completely. And now there was no going back. Either he'd end the engagement to save himself from a woman who'd humiliated him, or he'd double down and try to control her more thoroughly. Clara didn't know which outcome terrified her more. She straightened, smoothed her dress, and walked toward her father's waiting carriage. The driver helped her in, his face carefully neutral. He'd probably heard the gossip too, probably thought she was mad. Maybe she was. But as the carriage pulled away from Lady Pemberton's house, as Clara watched London pass by the window, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Alive. Completely, terrifyingly, wonderfully alive. Whatever came next, she'd face it as herself. Not as the girl they'd created, not as the bride they'd purchased. As Clara. Just Clara. And if that meant burning down her entire world, then she'd strike the match herself. And if that meant burning down her entire world, then she'd strike the match herself. The carriage had barely turned onto her street when Clara saw them. 2 carriages parked in front of her father's house. One she recognized as belonging to Adrian. The other bore the Holloway crest in gold leaf, which meant the Dowager Duchess had come as well. Her moment of triumph evaporated. Clara's hands clenched in her lap as the driver pulled up to the entrance. She could run. Tell the driver to keep going, to take her anywhere else. But running would solve nothing. Whatever was waiting inside, she'd brought it on herself. The butler opened the door before she could knock, his expression grim. "They're in the drawing room, miss. Your father requests—" "I know." Clara handed him her gloves and walked toward the drawing room with her spine straight and her chin up. She could hear raised voices before she reached the door. Absolutely unacceptable. She's made a mockery of both our families. That was her father. I'm aware. Adrian's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. Then what do you intend to do about it? Her father again. Clara pushed open the door. Four faces turned toward her. Her father stood by the fireplace, red-faced and trembling. Adrian was near the window, his posture rigid. The Dowager Duchess sat in the best chair, looking almost amused, and standing near her father was someone Clara hadn't expected. Mr. Thornton, her father's solicitor, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetual frown. Clara. Her father's voice could have frozen water. Sit down. I'd rather stand. That wasn't a request. Something in his tone made her comply. She chose a chair across from the Dowager, carefully arranging her skirts. Mr. Thornton, her father said, his eyes never leaving Clara, explain to my daughter the legal realities of her situation. The solicitor cleared his throat, pulling papers from his leather case. Miss Whitmore, the marriage contract between yourself and the Duke of Holloway was signed 3 weeks ago. According to the terms, your dowry, consisting of £50,000 in shares in Whitmore Industries, has already been transferred to the Holloway estate as a gesture of good faith. Clara's stomach dropped. What? The full transfer was contingent upon the marriage taking place, Thornton continued, his voice dry and precise. However, should the engagement be broken by your actions, provable misconduct, willful defiance, or behavior deemed unsuitable, the money is forfeit. It remains with the Holloway estate, and you receive nothing. You can't! Clara looked at her father. You gave away my inheritance? I secured your future, her father snapped, or I was trying to before you lost your mind. But if Adrian breaks the engagement, then the money returns to your father, Thornton said, with interest. The contract is quite clear. The penalty for breach falls on whoever initiates it. Clara's mind raced. This changed everything. She'd been trying to make Adrian break the engagement, assuming that would free her. But if the contracts were structured this way, then forcing Adrian to walk away would bankrupt his estate. The money would return to her father, yes, but Clara herself would likely never see it. Her father would simply arrange another marriage, another transaction. She'd been playing the wrong game entirely. I see you understand now. Her father moved closer, looming over her. You have no escape. You will marry the Duke. You will do it quietly, gratefully, and without any more of this rebellious nonsense. Or I will cut you off completely. You'll have nothing. No money, no home, no prospects. Clara looked at Adrian. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite triumphant, not quite sympathetic. Something in between. Did you know? She asked him. About the contract terms? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes. So all of this, letting me embarrass myself, letting me think I could force you to walk away, you knew it was impossible. I knew you'd figure it out eventually. His voice was quiet. I was curious how long it would take. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. He'd been watching her flail, watching her destroy her reputation, knowing the whole time that the trap was already closed. You bastard, she said softly. Her father's hand cracked across her face before she saw it coming. The sound echoed through the room. Clara's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning. That is enough! Her father's voice shook with rage. You will not speak that way to your betrothed. You will not speak at all unless you're apologizing for the humiliation you've caused. Clara touched her cheek, tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. The room was absolutely silent. Even her father seemed shocked by what he'd done. Harold, the Dowager's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Control yourself. She needs to learn. What she needs, the Dowager interrupted, standing, is a moment to collect herself. Miss Whitmore, come with me. It wasn't a request. Clara stood on shaking legs and followed the Dowager out of the drawing room, down the hallway, into her father's library. The Dowager closed the door behind them. "Sit before you fall down," she said, not unkindly. Clara sank into a leather chair, her hand still pressed to her cheek. The dowager poured 2 glasses of brandy from her father's decanter and handed one to Clara. "Drink." Clara drank. The alcohol burned, but it steadied her. The dowager settled into the chair across from her, studying her face. "That will bruise. Good." "Good?" "Visible evidence that your father struck you. It changes the dynamics considerably." The dowager sipped her own brandy. "Tell me something, girl. What did you think would happen? That my son would simply let you walk away from 50,000 pounds and his family's salvation? I thought I could make myself so unsuitable that he'd have no choice. And now you know better." The dowager set down her glass. "The contracts were designed specifically to prevent exactly what you attempted. Your father isn't stupid, neither is my son. They knew there might be, reluctance. They planned accordingly." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. "So I'm trapped," she said. "Everyone is trapped by something. The question is what you do about it." The dowager leaned forward. "You have 2 choices now. You can surrender, marry Adrian, play the Duchess, live the life that's been planned for you, or you can fight differently." "How?" "The contracts." "The contracts protect the money. They don't protect Adrian's pride, his reputation, or his heart." The dowager's eyes glittered. "You wanted to make yourself unsuitable. Fine. You failed, but you did succeed in getting my son's attention. For the first time in his life, he's met someone who challenges him, who doesn't bow and scrape, who's willing to burn her own life down rather than submit. He hates me for it. He's furious. That's different than hate." The dowager stood, moving to the window. "Adrian has never had to work for anything. Not respect, not obedience, certainly not affection. He's a duke. The world arranges itself around him. But you? You're not arranging yourself. Your sharp edges and defiance, and part of him, a part he doesn't understand yet, is intrigued." Clara shook her head. "He called this meeting to force my compliance. He called this meeting because he doesn't know what else to do with you." The dowager turned back. "My son is accustomed to problems that can be solved with money or title. You're a problem that requires something else entirely, something he's never had to use before." "What?" "Actual effort, actual understanding." The dowager smiled. "If you want to win this, stop trying to escape. Instead, make him prove he deserves you." "The contracts don't give me that power." "The contracts give you money. You already have all the power you need." The dowager moved toward the door, then paused. "And Clara, that mark on your face? Use it. Your father just showed everyone in that room that he's willing to use violence to control you. That changes the game considerably." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Clara sat alone in the library, her cheek throbbing, her mind racing. The dowager was right. She'd been playing the wrong game, fighting the wrong battle. The contracts meant she couldn't escape the marriage through scandal. But they didn't mean she had to make it easy. If Adrian wanted a wife, he'd have to earn one. If he wanted her compliance, he'd have to show her why she should give it. And if he wanted her to stop fighting, he'd have to give her something worth surrendering for. Clara finished her brandy, set down the glass, and stood. Her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace showed a woman with a red mark blooming across her cheek, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes blazing. She looked dangerous. Good. When she returned to the drawing room, the atmosphere had shifted. Her father stood in the corner, subdued. Mr. Thornton was gone. Adrian and the dowager were speaking in low tones by the window. They all turned when she entered. Adrian's eyes went immediately to her cheek, and something flickered in his expression. Anger, perhaps, or disgust. "Miss Whitmore," he said formally, "are you quite all right?" "Perfectly well, Your Grace." Her father started to speak, but the dowager cut him off. "Harold, a word, in the hall, now." She didn't wait for agreement, simply walked out. Her father, looking confused and wary, followed. Clara and Adrian were alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Adrian moved closer, his eyes still fixed on the mark on her face. "He shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. No, he shouldn't have. Clara held his gaze. But it's not the first time someone has tried to force my compliance through violence. Just usually more subtle. I'm not your father. Aren't you? You're trying to control me just the same, just using different methods. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'm trying to honor a contract. That's different. Is it? You want obedience. He wants obedience. You both believe you have the right to it because of money and power and gender. The only difference is he uses his fists and you use contracts. That's not fair. Shit. None of this is fair. Clara's control finally snapped. You get to make all the rules. You get to decide what happens to my money, my body, my entire future. And I'm supposed to smile and be grateful for the privilege of being owned by you instead of someone else. I don't want to own you. Then what do you want? Adrian ran his hand through his hair, frustration written across his face. I don't know. I want you to stop making this so difficult. I want you to see that this marriage could be beneficial for both of us if you just what? Submit? Disappear? Become the quiet, useful wife you described to Lord Pemberton? He flinched. You keep throwing that in my face. Because it's the truth. That's what you think of me, and now you're angry because I won't live down to your expectations. My expectations have changed, Adrian shouted, then caught himself, lowering his voice. You've seen to that quite thoroughly. Have they? Really? Because it seems to me you're still trying to force me into a box. It's just a different box than before. Adrian stared at her, his chest rising and falling with harsh breaths. What do you want from me, Clara? Tell me. Because I'm trying to understand and I don't know how to. He broke off, looking almost lost. I've never met anyone like you. Someone who talks back? Someone who won't let me hide behind my title and my assumptions. He stepped closer. Someone who makes me question everything I thought I knew about how this world works. Clara's breath caught. This was different. This wasn't the cold, calculated Duke. This was something raw, uncertain. I heard what you said to Pemberton, he continued. And you're right. I was cruel, dismissive. I reduced you to a transaction because it was easier than seeing you as a person with her own desires and fears and dreams. I'm sorry for that. The apology hung in the air between them. But, Adrian continued, you've been cruel too. Every scandal, every deliberately outrageous statement, you've been trying to hurt me, to humiliate me, to force me to walk away so you wouldn't have to take responsibility for ending this yourself. I couldn't end it myself. The contracts were signed before you started your rebellion. You didn't know about the penalty clauses when you started this. His eyes were sharp now, seeing too much. You were trying to manipulate me into being the villain so you could play the victim. Admit it. Clara wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right. Yes, she said finally. I was. Because it seemed like the only power I had. And now? Now I'm trapped. We both are. The difference is you designed the trap. Clara's voice was steady now, calm. So, here's what's going to happen, Your Grace. I will marry you in 2 weeks, as apparently everyone has decided, but I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I won't be quiet. I won't be obedient. I won't disappear into your estate and spend my life producing heirs and hosting dinners while you find your companionship elsewhere. I never said, you told Pemberton you would. Were you lying to him, or are you lying to me now? Adrian's face flushed. That was before I knew you, before any of this. And what's changed? You know I can argue politics now? You know I have opinions? That doesn't make me a person to you, it just makes me an interesting problem. You're not a problem. Then what am I? The question hung between them, sharp and necessary. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, seemed to struggle with something internal. I don't know, he said finally. I don't know what you are, but you're not what I expected, and you're not just a transaction anymore. Then what am I? Clara repeated, stepping closer to him. If I'm going to be your wife, if I'm going to spend my life bound to you, I need to know what I am to you. Not what I represent, not what I can provide. Me. Who am I to you? Adrian stared at her, and for the first time, Clara saw something like fear in his eyes, fear of the question, fear of the answer. "I don't know," he whispered. The honesty of it gutted her. The door opened and the dowager returned, her father trailing behind, looking chastised. "We've resolved the immediate issues," the dowager announced. "The wedding will proceed in 2 weeks. Clara will move into the Holloway townhouse tomorrow to begin preparations. Harold has agreed to certain restrictions on his behavior." Clara looked at her father. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "What kind of restrictions?" "He will not strike you again, the dowager said calmly. "Or I will personally ensure that every detail of today's incident becomes common knowledge. The courts may not care about a father disciplining his daughter, but society will, particularly when that daughter shows up bruised at social events." Her father's face went purple, but he said nothing. "Furthermore," the dowager continued, "Adrian will take full financial responsibility for Clara starting tomorrow. Harold, your access to her dowry is now contingent on her well-being. If she is harmed by you or anyone else, the transfer is reversed and you face breach of contract penalties that will bankrupt you. Are we clear?" The room was silent. I said, "Are we clear?" The dowager's voice could have cut glass. "Yes," her father said through gritted teeth. "Good. Then we're done here." The dowager looked at Clara. "Pack tonight. The carriage will collect you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring your maid if she's loyal. Leave her if she's not. You'll have new staff at the townhouse." Clara wanted to protest, to argue, to demand more time. But what would be the point? The trap had closed. The only question now was whether she could survive it. "Yes, Your Grace," she said quietly. The dowager nodded, satisfied. "Adrian, escort your fiancée to her room. She's had a difficult day." Adrian moved to Clara's side, offering his arm. She took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. They walked in silence up the stairs, down the hallway to her bedroom door. "Clara," he said as she reached for the handle. She turned. He was closer than she expected, his gray eyes searching her face. The mark on her cheek was darkening to purple now, impossible to miss. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I don't know what you are to me. Not yet. But I want to find out. And I swear to you, whatever else happens, I will never raise my hand to you. Never." Clara studied his face, looking for the lie, the calculation. But all she saw was a man who seemed as confused and off balance as she felt. "Words are easy, Your Grace," she said softly. "Let's see if your actions match them." She went into her room and closed the door, leaning against it as her knees finally gave out. She slid to the floor, her whole body shaking with delayed shock and exhaustion and fear. Everything had changed. Everything had gotten worse. In 2 weeks, she'd be married to a man she barely knew, trapped in a contract designed to prevent her escape, living in his house under his control. The rebellion she'd started felt like a child's tantrum now, ineffective, naive. But the dowager's words echoed in her mind. "Make him prove he deserves you." Clara pushed herself to her feet, moved to her writing desk, and pulled out paper and ink. If she was going to survive this marriage, she needed to think strategically. No more wild scandals, no more blind fury. She needed to be smart. She began to write, listing everything she knew about Adrian, his weaknesses, his pride, his assumptions, the things that mattered to him, his estate, his family name, his position in society. And then she listed everything he didn't know about her, her intelligence, her education, her mother's business acumen that lived in her blood even if it had never been acknowledged. If Adrian wanted a duchess, she'd give him one, but on her terms. A duchess who spoke her mind, who challenged him, who used every resource at her disposal to carve out space for herself in a world designed to erase her. The contracts might control her money, but they didn't control her mind, her will, her refusal to disappear. She would survive this. More than survive, she would find a way to win. Clara was still writing when Mary knocked softly and entered, her face pale. "Miss, is it true about tomorrow?" Clara set down her pen. "Yes, pack my things, everything I might need. And Mary, if you don't want to come with me, I understand. The Holloway household might not be pleasant." Mary's expression hardened with determination. "Where you go?" "I go, Miss Clara. Someone needs to watch your back." Clara felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." They worked through the night, packing Clara's life into trunks and cases. Clothes, books, the few pieces of her mother's jewelry her father hadn't sold. At dawn, Clara finally collapsed into bed for a few hours of restless sleep. When she woke, the carriage was already waiting. Her father didn't come to see her off. She was grateful. The Holloway townhouse loomed before her, all white stone and iron gates. Clara stepped down from the carriage, Mary behind her, and stared at what would be her prison for the foreseeable future. The door opened. Adrian stood there, still in his morning clothes, his hair slightly disheveled like he hadn't slept well either. "Welcome home," he said, and the irony in his voice suggested he knew exactly how absurd the words were. Clara walked up the steps, past him, into the marble entrance hall. Servants lined the walls, studying her with barely concealed curiosity. The quiet girl who'd become a scandal, the bride who'd tried to escape. "Your rooms are prepared," Adrian said behind her. "Third floor, east wing. You'll have privacy. My rooms are west wing." "How considerate." "Clara." His voice made her turn. He stood framed in the doorway, backlit by morning sun, looking exhausted and uncertain and almost vulnerable. "This doesn't have to be a war." She thought about her father's hand across her face, about years of silence and suppression, about the contracts that bound her future to a man who'd seen her as livestock. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does. At least until you give me a reason for peace." She turned and walked up the stairs, leaving him standing there in the hall. Behind her, she heard him say something too soft to make out. But she didn't stop, didn't turn back. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. And Clara Whitmore had just learned the most important lesson of all. You didn't win by escaping the cage. You won by making the cage too small to hold you. In 2 weeks, she'd marry a duke, but she'd be damned if she'd let him tame her. But she'd be damned if she'd let him tame her. The rooms Adrian had given her were beautiful and cold. High ceilings with ornate plasterwork, windows overlooking a garden she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to walk in, furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. A gilded cage, just like she'd expected. Clara stood in the center of the sitting room while servants brought up her trunks, her hands folded, her face composed. Mary hovered nearby, clearly unsure of the protocol in this new household. "Miss Whitmore?" A woman appeared in the doorway, older, with gray hair pulled back severely and a ring of keys at her waist. "I'm Mrs. Davison, the housekeeper. His Grace asked me to ensure you have everything you need." "Thank you, Mrs. Davison." The housekeeper's eyes flickered to the bruise on Clara's cheek, now a spectacular purple-green, then away. "Dinner is at 8. His Grace requests your presence in the drawing room at 7:30. "Requests or requires?" Mrs. Davison's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The Duke doesn't typically make requests, miss." "Then he's in for some disappointments." Clara moved to the window. "Tell His Grace I'll attend if I choose to. I'm not his wife yet." She could feel Mrs. Davison's surprise behind her, could practically hear the woman recalculating her assessment of this quiet bride everyone had gossiped about. "I'll relay your message, miss." After the housekeeper left, Mary closed the door and leaned against it. "Miss Clara, should you have said that? It's his house." "It's about to be my house, too." Clara turned from the window. "And I won't start by establishing that I can be summoned like a servant. He wants to see me at dinner? He can ask properly." Mary looked worried, but said nothing as she began unpacking Clara's things. Clara moved through the rooms, cataloging everything. The bedroom with its massive four-poster bed draped in dark green velvet. The dressing room with empty wardrobes waiting to be filled. The private bathroom with a copper tub large enough to drown in. On the writing desk in the sitting room, she found a note in strong, slanted handwriting. "There's a library on the second floor. You're welcome to use it." Clara stared at the note for a long moment, then tucked it into her pocket. A peace offering, or perhaps a test. She spent the afternoon organizing her books, setting up her writing materials, claiming the space as her own. At 7 o'clock, Mary helped her dress for dinner. A gown in deep sapphire that made the bruise on her face stand out even more starkly. "Miss, perhaps some powder," Mary suggested. "No, let everyone see it." At precisely 7:30, Clara descended to the drawing room. Adrian was already there, standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand. He turned when she entered, and his eyes went immediately to her cheek. Something tightened in his expression. "You didn't cover it," he said. "Why should I? It's the truth." "It's also going to cause talk." "Good." Clara moved to the sideboard and poured herself a sherry. "Let them talk. Let everyone see what happens when a woman is forced into arrangements she doesn't want." Adrian set down his glass with a sharp click. "You think I forced your father to strike you? I think this entire situation forced it. The contracts, the pressure, the expectation that I should quietly accept being sold." Clara sipped her sherry, grateful for something to do with her hands. "You're not responsible for his violence, but you're not innocent either." "I never claimed to be innocent." They stood on opposite sides of the room, the space between them charged with tension. Clara had expected anger, another argument. Instead, Adrian looked tired. "I spoke with my solicitor today," he said. "Asked him to review the marriage contracts. Looking for more ways to bind me? Looking for ways to give you freedom within the constraints." Adrian moved to the window, his back to her. "The contracts protect the money, yes, but they don't dictate how we live, how we exist together." Claire's heart beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership, about equality." He turned to face her. "And you're right. The way I described this marriage to Pemberton, it was cruel, reductive, wrong." "But accurate," Clara said quietly. "At the time." "Yes, at the time." Adrian moved closer, cautious, like approaching a wild animal. "But that was before I knew you actually had thoughts worth hearing, before you challenged everything I assumed about how this world works. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out how to make this work, for both of us." He stopped a few feet away. "I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm asking if there's a way we can both win." Clara studied his face, looking for the trap, the manipulation. But all she saw was genuine uncertainty. A man who'd never had to compromise before, trying to learn how. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A real partnership. You want to be involved in decisions about the estate? Fine. You want to continue speaking your mind about politics and economics? I won't stop you. You want rooms of your own, privacy, autonomy, you have it." Adrian took a breath. "In exchange, I ask that you stop actively trying to humiliate me. Stop using scandal as a weapon." "That's it? You'll give me freedom and all you want is for me to stop embarrassing you?" "I want a chance." His voice was rough. "A chance to prove I can be more than what you overheard on that terrace. A chance to earn your respect instead of demanding it." Clara felt something shift in her chest. This was what the Dowager had meant. Make him prove he deserves you. But she hadn't expected him to offer it himself. "How do I know this isn't just another way to control me? Give me the illusion of freedom while keeping me contained?" "You don't," Adrian admitted. "You'll have to trust me, or at least give me the opportunity to be trustworthy. Trust is earned, Your Grace, not given. Then let me earn it." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the tension in his jaw. "I know I don't deserve it yet. I know I've been arrogant and cruel and everything you've accused me of being, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to change, to be better." Clara wanted to say no, wanted to throw his offer back in his face, maintain her anger like armor. But she was exhausted, exhausted from fighting, from calculating, from always being on guard. And beneath the exhaustion was something else. Curiosity. What would Adrian Holloway look like if he actually tried? If he actually made an effort to see her as an equal? "One condition," she said finally. "Name it. You attend a meeting with me, tomorrow, at the Women's Political Union." Adrian blinked. "The suffragists?" "Yes. They're discussing property rights and economic reform. Topics you apparently think I'm capable of understanding now." Clara held his gaze. "You want me to believe you value my mind? Prove it. Come with me. Listen to women discuss politics without dismissing them as hysterical or naive." She could see the conflict on his face, the automatic resistance warring with his desire to prove himself. "All right," he said finally, "I'll go." Clara felt a surge of triumph she carefully hid. Then we have an agreement. I'll stop actively courting scandal. You'll give me real partnership, real voice in how we live, and we'll both try to make this marriage something other than a prison. An agreement. Adrian offered his hand. Clara looked at it for a long moment, then took it. His grip was warm, firm, and she felt the calluses on his palm. He wasn't just an ornamental aristocrat then. He worked his land himself sometimes. Dinner is served, Your Grace. Mrs. Davison appeared in the doorway, her eyes flickering between them with barely concealed interest. They ate in the formal dining room, a table that could seat 20 holding just the two of them at opposite ends. It should have been ridiculous. Instead, it felt symbolic, all this distance between them that would need to be crossed. Tell me about the estate, Clara said as they waited for the second course. Holloway Manor. What needs to be done first? Adrian looked surprised by the question. The east wing needs structural repairs. The tenant cottages need new roofs. And the drainage system for the fields is medieval. It needs a complete overhaul. Prioritize the tenant cottages, Clara said immediately. People before buildings. How many families? 15. And their current conditions? Adrian shifted uncomfortably. Not ideal, but they've been that way for years, which is exactly the problem. Clara set down her fork. You want my cooperation? You want me to believe this partnership is real? Start by showing me you care about the people who depend on you. Fix their homes first. The manor can wait. The manor is the family seat. It's been the priority for 300 years. And where has that gotten you? Debt and decay while the people who actually work your land live in squalor. Clara kept her voice level. You're a duke. You have power and responsibility. Use it for something other than preserving your own comfort. Adrian stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his expression. You actually care about them, the tenants. Of course I do. They're people. Their lives matter just as much as yours or mine. Clara paused. Doesn't that seem obvious? It should, Adrian said quietly. But I've never thought about it that way. They've always just been there, part of the estate, like the trees or the buildings. They're not trees, they're families. And if you want to restore the Holloway legacy, start by being a landlord worth having. Clara picked up her fork again. My mother believed that business was about people first, profit second. Treat workers well and they'll produce more. It's practical economics, not charity. Your mother was in business? She funded half of my father's first factory, negotiated better terms than his other investors. She understood numbers, strategy, risk. Clara smiled slightly. He erased her from the story after she died. Easier to pretend he'd done it all himself. Why didn't you tell me this before? You never asked. You assumed I was empty because I was quiet. Clara met his eyes. That was your mistake. The servants cleared the plates, brought the next course. Adrian was quiet, thoughtful. Clara could almost see him recalculating, reassessing. Tomorrow, he said finally. This meeting with the suffragists, what should I expect? Intelligent women discussing political theory and practical reform. Probably some men who actually respect female intelligence. Clara smiled sweetly. It might be shocking for you. I'm starting to think nothing about you will ever stop being shocking. There was something in his tone, not quite admiration, but close to it. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, focusing on her dinner. After the meal, Adrian walked her back to her rooms. They climbed the stairs in silence, the house quiet around them. At her door, he paused. Clara. He hesitated, then continued. Thank you for agreeing to try. I know you don't owe me that. I'm not doing it for you, Clara said honestly. I'm doing it because I'm trapped either way. This just seems less miserable than constant warfare. Fair enough. Adrian smiled and it transformed his face. Made him look younger, less burdened. Sleep well? Clara went inside and closed the door, leaning against it. Mary was already there, preparing her nightclothes. Well? Mary asked. How was it? Strange. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the dark garden. He's trying. I think he actually means it. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. The next morning, Clara dressed carefully for the Women's Political Union meeting. A practical walking dress in gray, her hair pulled back simply. She wanted to look serious, capable, not like a duchess playing at reform. Adrian was waiting in the entrance hall, also dressed practically. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Ready?" Clara asked. "No, but I gave my word." The meeting was in a building near Bloomsbury, up 3 flights of narrow stairs. Women filled the room, young and old, working class and aristocratic, all gathered around tables covered with pamphlets and papers. Clara felt something in her chest loosen. This was what she'd been missing: community, purpose, women who saw each other as equals. "Clara," a woman with red hair approached, smiling. "You came, and you brought—" She looked at Adrian, recognition dawning. "The Duke of Holloway." "Mrs. Morrison, may I present my fiancé, His Grace the Duke of Holloway." "Adrian, this is Catherine Morrison. She runs the Economic Reform Committee." Adrian bowed stiffly. Catherine studied him with frank assessment. "Well," she said finally, "at least you're here. That's more than most men would do. Try to keep an open mind, Your Grace, and don't interrupt." She swept away to start the meeting. Adrian leaned close to Clara. "She's terrifying. She's brilliant. Now be quiet and listen." The meeting was everything Clara had hoped. Catherine presented data on women's economic contributions, unpaid labor in homes, underpaid labor in factories, the complete lack of legal recognition for either. Other women added their own experiences. A factory worker described 12-hour days for half the wages men received. An aristocrat talked about watching her brother inherit everything while she got nothing, despite being the elder child. Clara watched Adrian's face throughout, saw the discomfort, the resistance, but also, gradually, something else: attention, consideration, the beginning of understanding. When the meeting ended, Catherine approached them again. "Well, Your Grace, what did you think?" Adrian looked at Clara, then back at Catherine. "I think I've been ignorant, willfully so." "That's a start." Catherine smiled. "Miss Whitmore, you're welcome anytime. We could use someone with your background in business and finance. And Your Grace, if you actually mean to support reform, rather than just accompanying your fiancé, we have committees that could use aristocratic allies. Men listen to dukes, unfortunately." After they left, Adrian was quiet on the carriage ride home. Clara waited, letting him process. "They're right," he said finally. "About all of it. The wages, the property laws, the legal status. It's all designed to keep women powerless. Yes, and I've benefited from that. Used it. The contracts with your father, they only work because the law gives him complete control over your inheritance until you marry. Then it transfers to me. You're just passed from one owner to another." "Yes," Clara said again, softer. Adrian turned to face her. "I can't change the law, not yet, but I can change the contracts, give you control of your own money within the marriage." Clara's breath caught. "You'd do that?" "I'll have my solicitor draw up an amendment. Your dowry is used for the estate, as agreed, but you have full say in how it's spent, and any income from Whitmore Industries, your share, that remains under your control. Completely." He paused. "It's not perfect, but it's something." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away fiercely. "Why?" "Because Catherine Morrison is right. Because you're right. And because I don't want to be the kind of man who owns his wife." Adrian's voice was rough. "I want to be the kind of man who deserves you, and that starts with giving you the power to leave if I fail. The contract still, the financial penalties will remain on me, not you. If you want out, you walk away with your independence intact. My solicitor will ensure it." He smiled slightly. "Considerate motivation for me not to be awful." Clara stared at him, this man who'd been so cold and calculating a week ago, now offering her the one thing she'd thought impossible: freedom. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Good. We're even. I don't understand you either." Adrian reached across the carriage and took her hand. "But I'd like to, if you'll let me try." The carriage pulled up to the townhouse. Adrian helped her down, his hand lingering on hers. Over the next week, things shifted. Adrian kept his word about the contracts. His solicitor drew up amendments that gave Clara unprecedented control for a married woman. She attended meetings with the estate managers, gave her input on repairs and investments. When she suggested selling some of the manor's less important artworks to fund the tenant cottage repairs, Adrian agreed without argument. They fell into a routine. Breakfast together where they discussed the day's plans. Separate mornings. Adrian with estate business, Clara with her reading and meetings. Afternoon walks in the garden where they talked about everything from politics to philosophy to their childhoods. Dinners where they debated and challenged each other. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something. 3 days before the wedding, the dowager arrived for tea. She studied them both with sharp eyes as they sat in the drawing room. "Well," she said finally, "you're not at each other's throats. That's progress." "We've reached a truce," Adrian said. "A partnership," Clara corrected. The dowager smiled. "Even better. Adrian, leave us. I need to speak with your fiancé." After Adrian left, the dowager turned to Clara. "You've changed him. He's changed himself. Don't be modest. He's listening now, thinking, questioning things he's taken for granted his entire life." The dowager sipped her tea. "Do you know what he told me yesterday? That he wants to establish a school on the estate for tenant children, boys and girls." Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "He didn't tell me that." "He wants to surprise you, thinks you'll approve." The dowager set down her cup. "You've made him want to be better. That's a dangerous kind of power." "I'm not trying to change him, aren't you? You pushed and challenged and refused to accept what he was, and he rose to meet you." The dowager leaned forward. "The question is, now that he's trying, now that he's proving himself, what will you do?" Clara thought about Adrian's face when he'd offered to amend the contracts, about the way he listened during their debates, actually considered her arguments instead of dismissing them, about how he'd walked into that suffragist meeting despite his discomfort because he'd given his word. "I'll give him what he's giving me," Clara said. "A real chance." "To be what? Partners? Friends?" The dowager's eyes glittered. "Or something more?" Clara's cheeks heated. "We'll see. See quickly. You're getting married in 3 days. It would be nice if you actually liked each other by then." That evening, Adrian asked Clara to join him in the library. She found him standing by the window, backlit by the setting sun. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a leather-bound ledger. Clara opened it. Inside were detailed accounts of the estate finances, every debt, every asset, every projection for the next 5 years. "This is everything?" she asked. "Everything. I want you to see exactly what you're getting into, the good and the bad." Adrian moved closer. "And I want your input on the recovery plan. Your mother's business sense clearly passed to you. I'd be a fool not to use it." Clara looked up at him, this man who'd described her as livestock 2 weeks ago, now offering her complete transparency and partnership. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me. You've earned it." Adrian reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the fading bruise on her cheek. "This is almost gone." "Yes." "Good. I don't like seeing it." His hand lingered, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "Clara, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Are you afraid of me? Of this marriage?" Clara considered lying, playing tough, but something in his expression made her choose honesty instead. "Yes, I'm terrified. Not of violence. I believe you when you say you'd never hurt me, but of disappearing, of losing myself in your life and your name and your expectations. I'm afraid too," Adrian admitted, "of failing you, of proving that I'm exactly the kind of man you overheard on that terrace, of not being enough." They stood close in the dimming light, both afraid, both trying despite their fear. "We're a mess," Clara said, almost laughing. "A matched set." Adrian smiled. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe two broken people can build something whole together." "That's very poetic for someone who insulted poets. You're making me into all sorts of things I wasn't before." His hand slipped from her face to her hand, fingers intertwining. "I don't know what we'll be in a year, in 5 years, but I'm starting to want to find out." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses, the warmth. So am I. That night, as Mary helped her prepare for bed, Clara caught her own reflection in the mirror. The bruise was nearly gone. Her eyes were brighter than they'd been in years. She looked like herself. But more than that, she looked free. The cage Adrian had built was transforming. Not disappearing, but changing into something she might actually choose to inhabit. And the man who'd reduced her to a transaction was becoming someone who saw her, really saw her. Clara didn't know if that would be enough. Didn't know if respect could become affection, if partnership could become love. But for the first time since she'd overheard that terrible conversation on the terrace, she had hope. In 3 days, she'd marry a duke. And maybe, just maybe, she'd get to keep herself in the process. And maybe, just maybe, she'd get to keep herself in the process. The morning of the wedding arrived with rain. Clara stood at her window watching water streak down the glass, turning London into a blur of gray and silver. Behind her, Mary and 2 other maids fussed with her dress. Ivory silk with delicate beading, elegant and simple. Not the elaborate confection her father had originally commissioned. That dress had been designed for the quiet girl who didn't exist anymore. This one was hers. "Miss Clara, we need to finish your hair," Mary said gently. Clara turned from the window. In the mirror, she looked like a stranger. The bruise was completely gone now. Her face was composed, calm, but her eyes held something they hadn't before. Certainty. A knock at the door interrupted them. The dowager entered without waiting for permission, resplendent in deep purple. "Out," she told the maids. "All of you." They scattered. The dowager closed the door and studied Clara with those sharp gray eyes so like Adrian's. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But sure." "Good. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." The dowager moved to the window. "I came to tell you something about my marriage." Clara waited. "I was 17 when I married the late Duke. I thought I was getting a fairy tale. A handsome man, a title, a life of privilege." The dowager's voice was flat. "What I got was a drunk who saw me as an incubator for his heir. He was cruel when he was sober and vicious when he wasn't. I spent 30 years in that marriage, and I survived by becoming harder than he could ever break." Clara felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not telling you this for sympathy." The dowager turned. "I'm telling you because you need to understand what you've already accomplished. In 2 weeks, you've done what I couldn't do in 30 years. You made my son see you, actually see you. And you did it without losing yourself." "I haven't married him yet." "No, but you will. In an hour, you'll walk down that aisle and bind yourself to him legally, financially, socially. Every way that matters in this world." The dowager stepped closer. "So I'm asking you now, before it's too late to turn back, are you choosing this? Really choosing it? Or are you still trapped?" Clara thought about the amended contracts in Adrian's study, giving her unprecedented autonomy. About the conversations over breakfast where he actually listened. About the way he'd walked into that suffragist meeting despite his discomfort, because he'd promised her he would. "I'm choosing it," she said, "not because I have to, but because I want to see what we could build together." The dowager smiled, and it transformed her severe face into something almost beautiful. "Then you're braver than I ever was, and luckier." She moved to the door, paused. "Make him work for it, Clara. Every day. The moment you stop challenging him is the moment he stops growing." After she left, Mary returned to finish Clara's hair. The other maids brought flowers, white roses, and greenery, simple and elegant. Clara's hands shook slightly as they handed her the bouquet. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary whispered. "Really beautiful." Clara met her own eyes in the mirror one last time. The girl she'd been, quiet, obedient, invisible, was gone. In her place stood someone who'd fought for the right to exist fully, who'd nearly destroyed herself rather than disappear, and who'd found, against all odds, someone willing to meet her halfway. The church was packed. Clara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes. Society had come to witness this spectacle. The quiet girl who'd caused such scandal, marrying the Duke, who'd somehow tamed her, except she wasn't tamed, and the looks on their faces suggested they were beginning to realize it. Her father's grip on her arm was tight enough to hurt. He'd barely spoken to her since the incident in his study. Now he leaned close as they walked. "Behave yourself," he hissed. "Don't embarrass me further." Clara looked up at him, this man who'd raised her to be silent, who'd struck her for speaking, who'd sold her like property. "I'm not yours anymore," she said quietly. "After today, you have no power over me. Remember that." His face went purple, but they'd reached the altar. He handed her over to Adrian with barely concealed fury and stalked to his seat. Adrian took her hand, and Clara looked up at him. He was immaculate in his formal attire, his face serious, but his eyes held warmth as they met hers. "You came," he said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might run. I was prepared to chase you if you did." Clara felt something flutter in her chest. "Would you have caught me?" "Eventually. I'm persistent when something matters." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You matter." The ceremony began. Clara heard herself make the vows, felt Adrian slip the ring onto her finger. The minister droned about obedience and duty, and Clara saw Adrian's jaw tighten at the words. When it came time for him to recite his vows, he paused. "I, Adrian Charles Holloway, take you, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore, to be my wife, to honor and respect, to listen to and learn from, to stand beside, not above, for as long as we both shall live." A murmur ran through the church. Those weren't the traditional vows. He'd changed them. Clara's eyes stung with unexpected tears. When the minister pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her, brief and careful, but with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Then he tucked her hand into his arm and led her back down the aisle, past all those staring faces, out into the rain. A carriage waited. Adrian helped her in, climbed in after her, and shut the door. They sat in silence as the driver pulled away from the church, the sound of rain drumming on the roof. "You changed the vows," Clara said finally. "The traditional ones were offensive. I'm not your master. I'm your partner." Adrian looked at her, and something in his expression was raw. "I meant what I said, about listening, about learning, about standing beside you. I know. I'm starting to believe you." "Starting to?" He smiled slightly. "What do I need to do to finish convincing you? Keep your promises, today, tomorrow, every day after." Clara shifted to face him fully. "Don't let this be the end of your efforts. Don't think that because we're married now, because the contracts are signed, that you can stop trying. I won't. I can't. You won't let me." Adrian reached out, cupped her face with one hand. "You're the most exhausting person I've ever met, and the most extraordinary. I don't know how this happened, but somewhere between your rebellion and my capitulation, I started to—" He stopped, looking uncertain. "Started to what?" Clara's heart was hammering. "Care. About you. About your thoughts, and your anger, and your ridiculous determination to change the world." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I don't know if it's love. Not yet. But it's something. Something that feels dangerous and necessary all at once." Clara felt tears spill over, couldn't stop them. "I feel it too, this terrifying thing that I don't have a name for." "We'll figure it out together." Adrian leaned forward, kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. Clara felt heat bloom through her body, felt herself respond in ways that should probably scandalize her, but didn't. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "The reception is going to be torture, hours of people congratulating us and making small talk. Can we skip it? Your father would have an apoplexy." "Even better," Clara smiled. "Let's go home. To Holloway Manor. Just us." Adrian pulled back to look at her. "Seriously?" "Seriously. I don't want to spend my wedding day performing for society. I want to see our home, our tenants, the place we're supposed to be building a life together." Something lit in Adrian's eyes. He knocked on the carriage ceiling. When the driver opened the small window, Adrian said, "Change of plans. We're going to Holloway Manor. Immediately." "But, Your Grace, the reception will proceed without us. Send word that the bride is unwell. Wedding nerves. They'll believe it. Clara laughed as the carriage changed direction. We're going to cause more scandal. Good. Let them talk. I'm tired of performing for them. Adrian pulled her close. I'd rather spend the day with my wife. The words sent a shiver through her. Wife. She was someone's wife now. Adrian's wife. Except she wasn't just someone's wife. She was Clara. Still herself. Still whole. The realization made her giddy. They arrived at Holloway Manor as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the old stone building golden. It was beautiful in a worn way, ivy climbing the walls, gardens overgrown but charming. Clara could see the decay Adrian had mentioned, the water damage on the east wing, the crumbling sections of wall, but she could also see the potential. It needs work, Adrian said as he helped her down from the carriage. Everything worth having needs work. Clara turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Show me everything. They spent the afternoon touring the estate. Adrian showed her the tenant cottages. The roofs were indeed terrible, but the families who lived there greeted them with cautious warmth. Word had apparently spread about the new Duchess, who'd insisted on prioritizing their homes. Your Grace, an older woman said, curtsying to Clara. We heard you argued for us, that the repairs are happening because of you. Clara glanced at Adrian, who shrugged. I might have mentioned whose idea it was. It was practical economics, Clara told the woman. Taking care of people who work the land makes good business sense. Still, the woman said, it's more than the old Duke ever did, or his father. You're different. After they left, Clara turned to Adrian. They like you. Actually like you. Not just fear you. They like you. I'm just the one who finally listened. Adrian took her hand. Come on. There's something else I want to show you. He led her to a small building near the manor house, currently empty. This was a schoolhouse, generations ago, before my grandfather decided education wasn't necessary for farm children. I thought, with your permission, we could restore it, hire a proper teacher, make it available to all the children on the estate, boys and girls. Clara stared at the building, then at Adrian. You're serious? Completely. You were right about education being power, about giving people opportunities. He squeezed her hand. I want to build something better here, with you. Clara threw her arms around him, surprising them both. Adrian caught her, held her, and for a moment they just stood there in the late afternoon sun, holding each other. Thank you, Clara whispered against his chest. For what? For listening, for changing, for seeing me. Thank you for refusing to be invisible. Adrian pulled back to look at her. For fighting, for making me better. They walked back to the manor house as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside, the staff had prepared dinner. Nothing formal, just simple food in the smaller dining room. Over the meal, they talked about plans for the estate. Clara showed Adrian her calculations for how to allocate the dowry funds most efficiently. He listened, asked questions, actually implemented her suggestions. You're good at this, he said, studying her notes. Better than my steward, honestly. I had a good teacher. My mother used to let me sit in on business meetings when I was young, before she died. My father banned it after, said it wasn't appropriate. But I remembered everything she taught me. Tell me about her, so Adrian said. Your mother. So Clara did. Told him about a woman who'd been sharp and kind and determined to prove that women could be just as capable in business as men. Who'd died too young, leaving Clara alone with a father who'd wanted to erase her influence. She would have liked you, Clara said finally. The you you're becoming, anyway. The you from the terrace? She'd have eviscerated you. Adrian laughed, deservedly so. He reached across the table, took her hand. I wish I could apologize to her for how I've treated you, for what I almost turned this marriage into. You still can, by being better, by building the kind of partnership she believed was possible. Clara squeezed his hand. Show her memory that men are capable of seeing women as equals. I will, I promise. After dinner, Adrian walked Clara to her room, except it wasn't the isolated suite from the townhouse. It was the Duchess's chambers connected to the Duke's rooms by a shared sitting room. You can lock the connecting door, Adrian said quickly. If you want privacy. I I know this is our wedding night, but I don't expect. Adrian? Clara touched his arm. Stop stammering. It's unbecoming of a duke. He smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I just don't want to pressure you. We're partners, but that doesn't mean. I know what it doesn't mean. Clara stepped closer. But it could mean other things, if we both want it to. Do you want it to? Clara thought about the careful distance she'd maintained, the armor she'd worn, thought about this man who'd gone from seeing her as livestock to seeing her as a person worth changing for. I want to try, she said, to be close to you, to see if what we're building can be more than just partnership. Adrian cupped her face in both hands, gentle and careful. Then we'll try, slowly, at your pace. And if you change your mind at any point, I'll tell you, I'm not quiet anymore, remember? He laughed and kissed her, and this time when they pulled apart, he followed her into the bedroom and closed the door behind them. What happened next was tentative and awkward and nothing like the smooth seductions in novels. Adrian fumbled with the buttons on her dress. Clara couldn't figure out his cravat. They both laughed at the absurdity of it, the nervousness. But beneath the awkwardness was something real, tenderness, care. The genuine desire to bring each other pleasure without demands or expectations. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the large bed, the rain starting again outside, drumming against the windows. Well, Adrian said, his voice rough. That was imperfect, Clara finished. I was going to say extraordinary. Clara turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband in every sense. It was both. Like us. Adrian traced patterns on her shoulder. Imperfect and extraordinary all at once. Clara settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What do we do now? Now. We sleep. Tomorrow we start building our life together, fixing roofs, opening schools, probably causing more scandals. Adrian pressed a kiss to her hair. And we keep trying to figure out this thing between us. Think we'll succeed? I think we don't have a choice. You're not someone I can half love, Clara. You're all or nothing. And I'm choosing all. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. I'm choosing all too, even though it terrifies me. Good. I'd be worried if you weren't scared. This is terrifying, but it's also necessary, Clara finished. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who'd started as a transaction and were becoming something neither of them had expected. The next morning, they were woken by urgent knocking. Adrian pulled on a robe and answered the door. The butler stood there, looking uncomfortable. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there are visitors. Lord Pemberton, Lord Cartwright, and several others. They're demanding to see you. They seem agitated. Adrian glanced back at Clara, who was already pulling on her dressing gown. Tell them we'll be down in 20 minutes. They dressed quickly, Clara choosing a day dress in deep green, Adrian in less formal attire than he'd usually wear for visitors. What do you think this is about? Clara asked as they descended the stairs. Nothing good. Pemberton doesn't visit unless he wants something. And Cartwright, you humiliated him. This could be ugly. Good thing I'm not afraid of ugly anymore. They entered the drawing room to find 5 men waiting, all looking varying degrees of uncomfortable and angry. Pemberton stood by the fireplace, clearly elected spokesman. Holloway, he said, not even glancing at Clara. We need to discuss your wife's behavior. My wife, Adrian said coldly, is standing right here. Address her directly or leave. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. This is a matter between men. No, Adrian interrupted. It's not. Whatever you've come to say, you say to both of us. Or you can leave now. The men exchanged glances. Cartwright stepped forward, his face red. Fine. Your Grace, he addressed Clara with obvious reluctance. Your presence at the Women's Political Union has caused significant disruption. You're encouraging radical behavior among women of good families. It needs to stop. Clara felt Adrian tense beside her, but spoke before he could. What exactly do you consider radical, Lord Cartwright? Discussing property rights, economic reform? Or is it simply women gathering to talk about anything other than needlepoint that offends you? You're inciting rebellion. I'm participating in legitimate political discourse. If that seems like rebellion to you, perhaps you should examine why women thinking threatens you so much. This is exactly the problem. Cartwright's voice rose. You speak like a man, argue like a man, refuse to accept your proper place. My proper place, Clara said quietly, dangerously, is wherever I choose to stand. And right now I choose to stand here, in my home, telling you that your opinions about my behavior are neither wanted nor relevant. Holloway, control your wife, Adrian laughed, the sound sharp and cold. Control her? I wouldn't dream of it. And I certainly wouldn't take advice from men so threatened by intelligent women that they storm into my home making demands. We're trying to help you, Pemberton interjected. Your wife is making you look weak, a laughingstock. The Duke, whose wife won't obey him. The Duke whose wife is his equal, Adrian corrected. The Duke who married a woman with a mind and the courage to use it. If that makes me a laughingstock in your eyes, Pemberton, then I'm comfortable being laughed at. The men stared at him, clearly shocked. You've changed, Sage, Pemberton said slowly. That conversation we had at the Ashford ball, you described this woman as quiet, useful, manageable. Now you're defending her radicalism? I was wrong, Adrian said simply. About her. About what I wanted from marriage. About everything. He moved to stand beside Clara, took her hand. And yes, I've changed. She changed me, made me better. Made me see that the world I was comfortable in was built on the silencing of half its population. I won't participate in that anymore. You're throwing away your reputation. I'm building a better one. As a man who respects his wife, who values intelligence over obedience, who believes women are people, not property. Adrian's voice was steel. If that costs me your friendship, Pemberton, then we weren't really friends to begin with. The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Cartwright spoke. This is her influence. She's poisoned your mind. She's opened my mind, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. Now, gentlemen, I believe you've said what you came to say. My wife and I have work to do. Work? Pemberton looked confused. Yes, we're establishing a school for tenant children, reviewing the estate's investment portfolio, discussing economic reform. Adrian smiled. All things that apparently qualify as radical these days. If you're uncomfortable with progress, I suggest you leave. The men filed out, muttering among themselves. At the door, Pemberton turned back. You'll regret this, Holloway. Both of you. The only thing I regret, Adrian said, is not changing sooner. After they left, Clara turned to Adrian. You just burned most of your social bridges. I know. Your reputation in certain circles is destroyed. Good. Those circles were toxic anyway. Adrian pulled her close. I meant what I said. Every word. You're worth more than their approval. We're building something better. Clara kissed him, fierce and proud. We are. Together. Over the following weeks, word spread. The Duke of Holloway had not only failed to control his radical wife, he'd joined her. He attended suffragist meetings. He spoke publicly about economic reform. He wrote letters to Parliament advocating for women's property rights. Society was scandalized. Some of Adrian's friends cut ties completely, but others, younger men, progressive thinkers, reached out, wanted to know more, wanted to help. And the women who'd been afraid to speak up saw what Clara had done and found their voices too. Margaret Ashford started attending the union meetings. The red-haired woman from the garden party wrote an essay about economic equality that was published in a radical newspaper. Change was slow, but it was happening. 3 months after their wedding, Clara stood in the newly opened school watching children, boys and girls together, bent over their lessons. Adrian stood beside her, his hand in hers. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly. Clara thought about the woman who'd taught her that intelligence had no gender, that capability wasn't limited by what society expected. Yes, she would be. Do you ever regret it? The scandal, the lost friendships, the reputation? Clara turned to look at him. This man who'd gone from seeing her as livestock to seeing her as his equal, who changed himself because she'd refused to change. The only thing I regret, she said, is not being this version of myself sooner. You weren't ready sooner, neither was I. Adrian pulled her close. But we're ready now. That evening, they hosted a dinner. Not for society's elite, but for the tenant families whose homes they'd repaired. for Catherine Morrison and the other suffragists, for the few aristocrats brave enough to align themselves with reform. Clara sat at the head of the table, not quiet, not invisible, not obedient. She was loud with her laughter, bold with her opinions, unapologetic in her existence. And Adrian sat beside her, not trying to control or diminish, but matching her energy, supporting her vision, loving her for exactly who she was. After the guests left, they stood together on the terrace where this had all started, where Clara had overheard the words that had shattered her illusions and sparked her rebellion. "Do you remember what I said that night?" Adrian asked. "To Pemberton? Every word. I'm sorry for all of it. I know, you've proven it." Clara leaned against the balustrade. "But I'm also grateful. Because if you hadn't said those things, if I hadn't heard them, I might never have found the courage to fight back, to become this. This? Free, fully myself, visible." Clara turned to face him. "You broke me that night, but the breaking let me rebuild into something stronger." Adrian cupped her face in his hands. "And you broke me too. Shattered every assumption I had about how the world worked, about what I wanted, about who I could be." "We're both disasters," Clara said, smiling. "We're both extraordinary," Adrian corrected. "And we're building something that matters. Together." He kissed her, and Clara felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined. It was messy and complicated and required constant effort from both of them. But it was real. And it was theirs. The quiet girl they'd all overlooked was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd refused to disappear, who'd fought for the right to exist fully, who'd transformed a transaction into a partnership. And the Duke who'd reduced her to livestock had become a man who saw her clearly, who valued her completely, who loved her fiercely. Together, they were rewriting the rules, reshaping what marriage could be, proving that power wasn't in control, but in choosing to stand beside someone who challenged you to be better. The world was changing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. And Clara Whitmore, Duchess of Holloway, suffragist, economist, radical, rebel, was helping to change it, not by being quiet, not by being obedient, not by disappearing, but by refusing to be anything less than everything she was. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.